Well, I'm sorry. I clicked the wrong button.
That was exciting.
I strongly dislike the Zoom UX. Let me turn that thing back on. All right. There we go. Screen sharing is enabled.
Okay, I was speaking on mute. Can you folks hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Cool. So I think I presented this like a few months ago, I guess. So this is basically a proposal slash idea for the MCS API to incorporate multi-network. So right now it talks about the flat network where all the pods in one cluster are routable from the pods in another cluster or can have direct connectivity. I think this is for the scenario where the clusters cannot be like they're not connected directly, but they're connected via a gateway or they are on discrete networks. So I think the proposal was to like create endpoint slices with FQDN that represent the remote cluster or the pods that are running in the remote cluster for the same service. This diagram shows that approach. So basically the way it works, so like the service import that we have today, which references the endpoint slices. So you would have one endpoint slice per cluster. We are already aware of that, or like that's basically the spec. In case of the multi-network, instead of having the pod IPs or the endpoints directly behind the endpoint slice, you would reference QDN or the load balancer or like the whatever represents the ingress on the other cluster or the remote cluster. And then one of the things that is required to do this with like the proper load balancing is to have endpoint slices support weights. Like me and Jeremy presented like the use case to support weights for endpoint slices in the last network SIG meeting. There was some positive response. There was also some pushback, but then I was asked to refine this further, not to call these weights, rather I mean, it's more like the number of endpoints actually, if you think about it, because this is more like the L4 load balancing. So there is some like refinement that needs to be done and go back to the SIG network to see like if we can have that weights added to the endpoint slices. So at that point, I think we would have the complete model or the building blocks to basically make this multi-network MCS work. Yeah. Any questions, or did I just talk something that didn't make sense? Let me know. Yeah. So from the spec standpoint, I think there are two things. One is being able to identify if a cluster is running on a different network or on the same network. By default, we could assume that like all the clusters are running on the same network, which means it's a flat network and pods are routable. But let's say like they are running on different networks and you want to represent them. The idea was to like use the let me so this was use the same approach as what we are doing with the cluster names. So we are going to use the same cluster claim to also represent the network for that cluster. So you could do something like network.mcs.kx.io. So yeah, and then that would help the MCS controller, or like that would tell the MCS controller that it's running on a different network. When that happens, when the MCS controller sees that it's running on a different network, it's going to use a different approach to generate the endpoint slice, which is to find the appropriate gateway that will help route the traffic into the cluster, and then use that gateway as the ingress on the endpoint slice it generates for the cluster. If that makes sense. So I think that will be the main change on the MCS API. And then there is also this is open up for like discussions. If you have more than one gateways, how do you which one do you pick on the remote cluster? That's more for like the MCS controller implementation. For example, Istio supports having like only one such ingress. But yeah, I think that's more like the open question that we can talk about. But basically, that's the high-level overview of where we are with this and what changes are being proposed.
Thanks, Anil. Any thoughts?
Well, was there any discussion about specific changes to endpoint slice, like how to represent the weights exactly? Like, would it be?
Yeah, I think the point there was weights are a bit misleading, and there was a concept of like the what do you call it, like, so it might be a bit confusing in the sense it might be confused with like the computing capacity on the other side, because when you say like weight 1 and weight 5, it's not strictly the number of pods. It could be like a pod that comes with like more memory and more CPU, right? I think if you consider like what we exactly want is how many endpoints are behind that endpoint slice, right? Like not actually the load balancing mechanism. So I think there was like a pushback on if we were to do this with the load balancing versus doing something specific for MCS. They were fine if we were to do something specific with MCS and also be very clear about what we need, meaning in this case, what we need is like the number of endpoints behind that load balancer.
Right. So the number of endpoints would be a single property within an entire endpoint slice, right? So effectively, endpoint slice would be like, say, one gateway IP. Well, it could be multiple. Could have multiple gateways, I guess, theoretically.
Yeah.
And then basically, number of endpoints would just be per IP or per endpoint slice. I'm just curious, like maybe we're not at that level of detail yet in designing it. But.
Yeah, I think I haven't started working on that. Yeah, I think I'll add those details. I think what was Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think the for endpoint slice, you would have the number of endpoints behind that endpoint slice, right? So there'll obviously be FQDN that will represent the gateway. It might have 1 or 2 or 3 MPs, but for the DNS or for the load balancing, you can give a hint that says, hey, these are like the number of endpoints behind this FQDN.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think, yeah, the biggest concern was that a generic weight function might be used in all kinds of ways that are really not friendly for Kubernetes service networking. Like count of endpoints behind an endpoint is what we want, right? And that, you know, that also has some churn, but it'll churn with things like pod scheduling and events that normally come with some churn anyway. My recollection of the meeting with Signet, it's been a busy week and, you know, it's already like 4 days. So, but my recollection is that kind of the biggest concern was that somebody might try to use this for implementing like dynamic feedback and load balancing, which, you know, that can have constant changes, like and kubeproxy wouldn't like that. You know, so they didn't really like the idea of a weight feature on the endpoint slice, but they absolutely see the case for a like this endpoint represents n other endpoints, and we want to expose that. And I think there's a lot of appetite to bite that problem off. So very open to solving our problem, just wanting to make sure that it's like a specific API and not a general API that's going to get abused in all kinds of really painful ways.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I
that makes
think-
total sense.
Nathan, you asked something. Sorry.
I was just saying, yeah, that's great. That makes total sense.
Yeah, I think Jeremy put it pretty well. Yeah, it was kind of confusing, I guess, what I was talking about. But I think, yeah, that's exactly the summary. Yeah. So I think the questions I have was, can I submit a PR for like the MCS API, Jeremy, or is it like, should we have to wait until the endpoint slice waits?
Well, what would the change be to the MCS API? Is it just the addition of this optional?
Network? Yeah, identification of the network. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. Like, we can say, like, if you're using a multi-network, this is how we recommend doing it.
Okay.
Because this is more like an optional add-on to the API.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the API itself wouldn't really change at all. It's just if you have multi-network, you know, you
This
should
is how
say
you
this.
would, yeah, represent it, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Very similar to the cluster ID. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know, Laura, you're kind of driving the cluster property. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, big fan of using cluster claim / cluster property for this. That's definitely in the purview of that. Yeah, I mean, logistically, I think there's some space in the cluster IP kept to refer to this well-known property, if that's what we want. But then I think there's some room in the MCS API kept directly about how that is expected to change behavior for the MCS controller.
Yeah, I think, Laura, it probably makes sense that, you know, maybe we add it to both.
Yeah, I think so.
Make this,
And Anil,
make
we
network a
can
well-known
DM
name.
about it too.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you saying like, yeah, so there's also an API that can help us, or that there's a placeholder in the API also to identify this?
Just in terms of where you want to make this PR to represent this addition, this option. Specifically, there's 2 places in like the various documents that we have. So I can DM you with like the exact spots. And so
Okay.
that's it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I think in all cases, network seems like a reasonable, well-known cluster property anyway. And so, you know, we have cluster set ID, we have cluster ID. I think network just naturally fits there, so we might as well add it as a well-known name to that cap. But yeah, this is awesome. This is really nice and simple, and I think it fits well with the very specific use cases we want to target with MCS, minimal extension of the API, and kind of still completely leaving it open to implementations. So, you know.
Yeah, thanks a lot for bringing this. I have to imagine this is like a fairly common scenario that will, if we can add some accommodation for it, unlock things for many others.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, this is definitely a common use case. So.
Yeah, it came up at KubeCon talking to people about MCS specifically. So this is very timely. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Cool.
Excellent.
I'll years. Look, yeah. No problem.
I didn't mean to talk over you. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anil. I think that's our agenda for today.
I think so. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks a
See
lot.
you soon.
See you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.